Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on NetSuite Expense Management. We'll just go ahead and get started with a quick agenda. So following our introduction, we're going to be doing an overview on NetSuite Expense Management functionality. So just a quick introduction to the functionality that's available. We'll then be discussing some of the high-level benefits of NetSuite Expense Management before we go into a demonstration, which is going to be taking up the main proportion of today. We're going to spend as much time as possible within the NetSuite demo environment. For those of you that don't know me, I am the host for today. My name's Ross Johnston and I am an account manager here at OneKloudX. So my focus is on maximising as much value out of the NetSuite system for all of my clients. So just again, a quick introduction to the webinar today and to the OneKloudX user group, or ONUG for short, for those of you that this may be the first time joining one of these sessions. So first of all, in terms of OneKloudX, we provide NetSuite implementation services, support and development across the full suite within NetSuite. As part of that, we provide monthly ONUG OneKloudX user group webinars, which focus on maximising NetSuite value. So typically look to focus on areas of the system that are underutilised or that you might not be aware of, to bring attention to these features and make sure that you are making the most of your investment with NetSuite. Our recent webinars have included the likes of a focus on reporting and analytics, as well as a couple of webinars on some of the 360 dashboards functionality that's available within NetSuite. And our webinar last month was on sticky notes and file drag and drop, which are two sort of utility suite apps that are available for free on the Suite App Marketplace. Now, if you are, again, perhaps new to these webinars and you would like to receive the recording as well as the user guides that we have created for these previous webinars, just go ahead and pop a message or comment in the chat box there saying user guide, and I will personally follow up following today's webinar to make sure that you can access all of the user guides that we have produced as part of those past webinars. Perfect. So on to the focus of today, which is NetSuite's expense management functionality. Now, in terms of an introduction to NetSuite expense management, it is a function that is available with all editions of NetSuite. So regardless of whether you're on Suite Success Financials First, or Wholesale Distribution, or Manufacturing, or Services Edition, the list goes on, you will be able to access the expense management functionality within your edition of NetSuite without any additional module that has to be added to your subscription. Now, with the NetSuite expense management functionality, you do, of course, have to provide users access to be able to enter as well as approve the expenses. And that can be done through the lighter access employee self-service license to be able to enter and approve the expense reports. Now, those of you that may be using NetSuite from a purchase order processing perspective may already be familiar with the employee self-service or employee center licenses, as they are called. So if you have these in place already, then you can start to utilize these from an expense management perspective as well. So as well as being able to access NetSuite's expense management functionality directly through a laptop, through the UI on a browser, it can also be accessed through the iOS and Android compatible mobile applications for that ease of entry and approval of expenses on the go. With the expense management functionality, there is also the approval and workflow capability. In today's demonstration, we'll be going through the standard approval process there, where it goes to the supervisor and then to the finance or accounting team for that final level of approval. But as with the other approval processes within NetSuite, it is customizable through the workflow generation tool to allow you to route those expenses as appropriate. There is also the option to integrate with American Express if you are using Amex credit cards to allow for the automatic generation of expenses within NetSuite. So in terms of a little bit more details on the expense management functionality, NetSuite's Expenses provides that interactive interface both for employees that are actually entering their expenses and for managers that need to approve them, whether that is through the iOS or Android app or just through a regular browser. Now, employees can enter their expenses, they can attach receipts, and they can also easily track the status of these expenses as they go through the different stages of approval and reimbursement. From a manager's perspective, they can, of course, review these expense reports, decide whether they're going to approve or reject them, hopefully approve them, as well as having visibility of past reports. Now, in terms of the levels of access, the customizable roles, of course, does apply. So say, for example, you are currently utilizing the employee center roles for purchases, and you would only like some employees to be able to access the expense functionality, then of course that can be factored in using those customizable employee center roles. Okay, so just a quick roundup and summary of the benefits of the NetSuite Expense Management. First of all, you would be utilizing out-of-the-box functionality. As mentioned, NetSuite Expenses is included in all editions of NetSuite, so there is no specific additional module that you need to purchase. It's just ensuring that the users have the correct level of access to the functionality. Beyond that, it provides the opportunity to automate and simplify a process that perhaps is manual and off-system, maybe spreadsheet or email-based at the minute. So again, bringing as much information into NetSuite as that one source of truth allows you to have that visibility in one central place and utilize more of NetSuite's standard reporting functionality. Beyond that, it does also aid in productivity, both from the employee's perspective, where they can enter expenses on the go, as well as from an approval perspective and from the AP and reimbursement side of things as well, as it is one centralized process. Again, through the mobile app, this provides an easy-to-use mobile expense tracking tool, allowing you to enter expenses on the go, which we will get into a little bit more detail during the demonstration. And beyond that, of course, it can also eliminate the requirement for third-party applications. So if you are using a specific third-party expense allocation tool, then there is, of course, the opportunity to streamline the licenses that you've got in place and utilize NetSuite's native functionality. Okay, perfect. So as mentioned, we're going to be focusing as much as possible on the demonstration today. So I'm just going to jump over into my NetSuite demo account that I've got set up for today's session. So you see here, I'm currently logged in as the CFO in this demo account, but I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our Employee Center employee, which is one of these custom Employee Center roles that has been set up. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Employee Center, you'll see straight away when we log into this role that it is a much more streamlined interface in terms of the areas of the system that these users can access. These users, the Employee Center or Employee Self-Service, as they're often referred to, have the option to enter and approve expense reports, as well as purchase orders that we can see here. But again, based on the level of access that you want to provide, that can be limited down. So if you want certain users to only be able to enter expenses, whereas other users can only enter purchases, then of course this can be factored with the user role design. So on our expense reports, we can see here a summary of the expense reports that this user, Abby Kwan, has entered. But beyond that, we can also view a report on our previous expense reports. We could go and search for certain reports, as well as viewing any expense report policies and imported employee expenses if we are using the Amex credit card integration. I'm just going to start off by going and looking at our expense report policies. So from Abby Kwan's perspective, this would be the central place where we can see all of the information on the policies that we have got around expenses. Now, depending on how strict these are, of course, you don't have to use the policies, it is optional, but the policies does provide that guidance as well as some automation in terms of the rules of what needs to be entered for that expense report to be valid. So in this demo account, we have got one set up for our meal allowance. So I'll just go ahead and view this expense report policy here. Now on the policy, this would typically be set up by a system administrator or somebody in the finance team, and would be visible to any employees that the expense report policy applies to. So we can see here that this specific policy is all around our meal allowance. The description here saying that we've got a meal allowance of $30 per day and that this is currently in effect. We can go further and start to filter down these policies. So if we're operating in a multi-entity structure within NetSuite, we can have certain policies that are applicable to certain subsidiaries, or beyond that, we can use the native department, class, and location to filter down exactly which areas of the business these policies apply to. You'll see here as well that we can then set the actual policy details. So how we are going to limit this policy. In this case, we've got it limited per day. The maximum amount, in this case, $30, as well as additional rules here. And again, we can click into these fields to see exactly how we can set up these rules. In terms of the actions, you'll see here that we want to warn the employee if they are breaching this policy. So it brings attention and they are aware of any breach to the policy. You'll see here that we can also set up the policies that they require memos as well as receipts. And if we want to set additional rules around how we warn employees on the expense policies. So just coming back here, we'll go ahead and we will enter a new expense report from the option here. Now again, this can be done through the web UI as well as through the mobile device, something that I'll come to a little bit later on in the demonstration. So when we're entering the expense report, we simply need to go through and enter the date that we basically had that certain expense, as well as selecting the category for that expense. Now, the expense reports are set up to be easy to use for end users that might not be in the finance team. So the categories effectively allow you to select that just using natural language. And then in the background, they are tagged and tagged against a specific expense account to allow that correct mapping of the transaction. So we'll go here and we will select one of our categories, being the meal allowance. And we'll see here a little bit about how this expense category is mapped to the relevant GL code. Now, of course, in terms of the form design, we can limit down the fields that are visible to employees. So say, for example, we want to keep this nice and easy. We want to streamline this form and make it so that we can only see the category from the employee's perspective. Of course, we can do that and still have the mapping set up in the background. From here, we're going to go along and start to enter the information. We'll see that the department in this case has defaulted based on the employee's department, but of course, department, class, and location can be entered as appropriate for that specific employee. We'll go ahead here and select 35, and we will say that our currency is in AUD. And of course, we can have multiple currencies supported as well if we are tracking expenses overseas or in multiple different currencies. You'll see here there is the option to select that a receipt has been attached, as well as the option to attach a file directly from here, where we can open up our file cabinet and attach our specific receipt to that transaction line. Now, expenses do also allow for the drag and drop functionality. So again, we have recently hosted a webinar on NetSuite's drag and drop. So if that is a feature that you are using, then of course that can apply to expenses as well, to allow the ease of dragging and dropping multiple files to the one expense claim. We'll go ahead and we'll enter in another line here, and we'll do a slightly different option, which would be for travel. You'll see here when we select personal vehicle travel, again, it selects the expense account. But in this case, it also allows us to enter a quantity and rate, that rate being calculated based off the reimbursement for the mileage. So this can all be set up in the background, again, by an administrator or somebody in the finance team to make sure that all of the rules around the categories, the related expense accounts, as well as any rates that apply, are all pre-calculated so that the end user simply has to enter in that information. You'll see here, if we enter in that we have completed 100 kilometers, it's going to automatically multiply by the rate to give us our full amount there that is reimbursable. Now, before we go ahead and save this transaction, another thing to note is that from here, we can also show the policies. So if there's anything that we are unsure of, we can see it when we're entering the transaction itself, as well as the option to be able to import expenses. So again, using that Amex corporate card option. You'll see here that on a line-by-line basis, we can also mark that that has been purchased on a corporate card to allow for easy reconciliation when it comes to the back end of the process. So I'm going to go ahead. I've selected these two lines and I am going to submit. But when I submit this, we'll see that our expense report violates the policy. So we get a nice warning of that there. And we are prompted to enter a memo to explain this expense. We'll see here, nice and intuitively, the system also highlights that in red. So we have got absolutely no excuse for what we have missed there. So we can go back and say that this was a business lunch that we are entering the meal allowance for. And we can go ahead and submit that from here. You see here that the warning still stands. The expense report still violates the meal allowance, this time because it's $35, so it's over the $30 limit. But we are going to go ahead and select OK and submit this anyway, and just try our luck and try and get that approved by our supervisor and from the accounts team. So you see here now that this expense report has been entered. It has gone to a status of pending supervisor approval, and that's going to follow through whatever the approval process is that you've got configured for your expenses. As mentioned in this demo account, we've got it set up to go to the supervisor for approval and then pass through to the finance team to be able to give that final OK to reimburse this expense. Now, we've just changed role here to our Employee Center Manager, and we'll see as we log in, we have got a reminder that one expense report is pending approval. So effectively the expense that we've just gone through the process of entering there. Now, as well as having visibility within NetSuite, you will also get email reminders as well as the option for push notifications if you are using the iOS or Android mobile app. I'm just going to go ahead and select this one expense report. From here, if we have multiple expense reports, we can bulk approve by selecting all and then saving, or otherwise we can drill into the transaction itself. We can review all of the expense lines, as well as any files or receipts that have been attached as evidence. and then we can go ahead and approve this transaction from here. So what that's going to do is it's going to remove that from our reminders, as well as sending a notification to the next person in line for that approval. In this demo account, it is the finance team. So I'll just go ahead and change to finance role. Now, again, this approval process that we're working through just now is just the standard one. If you do want further levels of approval, or perhaps you just want one level of approval where it goes straight to finance, then of course that can be accommodated through the NetSuite workflow generator. Now, changing role here to the financial controller, we'll see here again we have got our reminders for our expense reports to approve. And again, we can bulk approve, or we can go ahead and just select the expense number 10 that we have been working through this process. At this point, you'll see that the status is updated to pending accounting approval. So we can go ahead and review this transaction. We can go in, we can edit this, make any changes, perhaps update any tax codes, update any of the expense accounts. Again, review any of the attachments in the form of receipts. And then finally, go ahead and either reject this or tick that we are providing accounting approval for this expense. Now you see from here, it then goes to a status of approved by accounting. We have visibility that this has been approved by the supervisor as well as received accounting approval. And we do also have a full audit log on this transaction as well, from a reporting and compliance perspective. So we have full visibility of who approved these transactions and when they approved them. Now from there, in terms of the reimbursement, we would follow a pretty similar process to our standard AP for suppliers. We would be able to see any outstanding reimbursements in our AP aging summary, broken down by employee. We can, of course, customize this standard AP aging report if we are wanting to split that into a separate employee and supplier report. And we can go from here, drill down into the detail, again, taking us back to the expense report that we've followed through the process, and then ultimately process this as part of one of our standard bill payment processing payment runs to create the ABA file and then upload that to the bank to pay our employees for the expenses that they have occurred. From an employee's perspective, they would be able to have visibility again from the employee center role that has now gone through all of the different levels of approval, and it's now at a status of approved by accounting, as well as receiving an email notification as well that expense report has been approved, and they can soon expect the reimbursement as well. So that's mainly it from a NetSuite web user interface perspective, and we'll just jump back into our slides so that we can go through more on the mobile side of things. So in terms of the NetSuite mobile app, this can be accessed again through iOS and Android. When we are logging into the app, the standard username through email and password applies, as well as the option to set up our company single sign-on if we are using that as well. Once we are logged into the mobile app, we'll be able to see a summarized view of our dashboards. In this case, we can see any expenses that we have been adding as we go, as well as any of our approvals if we are a manager that has to approve these expense and purchase transactions. When we go ahead and select Add Expense, it's going to take us to this screen here where we can add expenses on the go. Now, one feature that's really good about the mobile app is the expense logs are available offline. So say, for example, you're on a flight and you want to be able to just quickly add an expense and take a picture of that receipt, then you can do that without being online as well. From here, if you select the camera icon, that's when you can go ahead and capture using your camera, or otherwise you can select an existing photo if it was a receipt that you took a photo of previously. So the whole concept around the mobile app is to ensure that you are adding the expenses to the expense log on the go, and then you can submit that as one centralized expense report based on your internal policies. For example, at the end of the month, I know that it is the 31st of July today, so some of you might have to go and submit your expenses for July later on today. But effectively, we are adding these expenses as we go, so it's less labour intensive when it gets to the end of the month or otherwise when we are submitting these expenses. Now, from here, when we have attached that and created that expense line, we'll see here that we have updated from 1 to 2 expenses now that we have added that additional expense. From there, we would go ahead at the end of the month or otherwise and click Report Expense. It would take us into this new expense report page. And from here, we can add those rows either from our expense log. We can add additional rows by taking new photos of expenses and creating the relevant information there, or we can add in blank rows and add them as we go. From here, it's going to go ahead and show us the list of all of the expenses that we have added to the log over time. And we can select all of those and then confirm at the bottom that we would like to add this to our expense report. From there, we then need to confirm the detail. Again, just making sure that we've got the correct category, the correct amount and currency. If we do want to have this as a billable expense, then of course it can be tagged against a customer or project. And this is effectively doing what we are doing in the web interface, but just on a mobile device where we're confirming all of the details of that particular expense line. Now from there, we go ahead and add all those lines and then go ahead and submit our expense report. From there, we will then have the manager's perspective. So from the manager's view of the mobile app, they will have visibility of their approvals and any expense reports that they need to approve. And they can go ahead and select that, which will take them into this screen here. Now from this screen, they'll be able to select again all of the expense reports. They can bulk approve using the Approve All button at the bottom, or they can go ahead and investigate each expense accordingly, where again, they can drill in and see all of that level of detail before they make a decision as to whether they are going to approve or reject that expense for the employee. So hopefully this demonstration has given a little bit of flavour as to how the expenses would be entered and approved, both from the NetSuite web UI as well as from the mobile device as well. So that's taken us up to about 1:30. So I think just now would be a good time to wrap up with any questions. So I'll just double check the chat box to see if there has been any as we go. So a question from Praveen: Employee Center dashboard, is that linked to all employees? So effectively with the Employee Center, you can apply that role as you would any other role within NetSuite. And effectively you can determine exactly who has access to that and who doesn't. Generally speaking, if it's a user within the business that isn't going to be entering expenses or using the purchase functionality that Employee Center users can use as well, then it would only be linked to specific employees that need that functionality. The reason for that being that there is a license implication. Although the licenses are lighter and more cost effective than the general access users, there still is a cost associated to provide access to those employees. Got another question here from Donovan. Can we restrict access to expense categories using policies? So we can't specifically restrict the access to those categories using the policies functionality, but we can indeed restrict the expense categories that certain users have access to based on the form configuration and a little bit of customization that would be required there to effectively determine which employees can access which of the expense categories. So yes, it can be done, but it wouldn't be specifically through the policies functionality. And if that's something, Jonathan, that you would need assistance with, then please feel free to reach out with me, and I can chat to you about how OneKloudX could assist with that as well. So I've got a question there. What type of credit card do you need to be able to auto-upload expenses to the expense reports? So American Express corporate cards have a specific integration available to allow you to automatically import those expense lines and then submit those as part of your expense report. Otherwise, if you are using another corporate credit card solution, then you can typically get a CSV out of that corporate credit card solution and then import that directly into NetSuite as an expense report. Now, there may be other options available, so if you have any specific corporate cards that you're currently using, then I'd be more than happy to discuss further and see if there are any automations available there. Okay, perfect. I see we are plugging my email address there. So if you do have any specific questions, or if you would like a tailored demonstration or discussion around this functionality or any other NetSuite functionality for that instance, then please feel free to get in touch with myself directly at the email address provided, which is ross.johnston@onecloudx.com.au. We will also be finalising our webinar invites for next month's webinar. The focus of that is going to be on the 2025.2 NetSuite release. We'll be covering some information on the release process and everything that you need to consider as part of the new release. And we will also be providing a summary of the top features to look out for. As I'm not expecting that everyone on this call will go through all of the 60+ pages of release notes. So I will do my best to summarise that, and we will do that on the next webinar, which just now is penciled in for the 21st of August. But we will confirm that and send out invites accordingly. But thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. I see a lot of familiar faces as well as new people. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to join. But if you have any questions, then please, again, feel free to reach out to myself directly at ross.johnston@onecloudx.com.au. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a nice day.